Hey, fellow G&Ters, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we're into obstacle number 7 of the 9 things that can fuck up your life.
That's right.
And it is about being blinded by discussions and arguments.
I got it with me, Eric. I could read it.
Well, in a weird way, I was just going to say, Daniel, we're recording this right at the moment when we have our great American political debate going on, our
Oh.
ancient gladiators stumbling
Ancient.
into the ring.
I mean, gladiator is a really loose term for these two gentlemen. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't think that at the peak of either of their athletic lives, either one of them would be anything to marvel over.
But what about their oratory skills? Like a great Cicero combating Mark Antony in the peak of their power. No, it's not like that.
No, no,
Like a Socrates.
no.
No, it's just two blundering old geezers.
That's right. And for those of you who are out of the country, this we are referring to the very, very early presidential debates before they were even nominated by their parties, by the way. This is just
Yeah,
the presumptive nominees debating, whatever.
the trial run that sees whether one of them can make it to the end.
Yes. Can either one of these elderly gentlemen remember where they are or stand for 90 minutes?
True, true, true.
Can they
Yeah.
stand? Is standing is that a requirement? No, not never mind. We'll get them a stool.
Well, it was interesting. We were talking pre-mic, Daniel, and you were like, well, part of this is the political thing going on. So you're going to take it back to that way ultimately. But
Yeah,
we're doing it right now,
doing it right now.
in that moment, being blinded by discussion and debate.
Yeah. Let me
All right.
read this real quick.
Yeah, you're going to read it. Yep.
Yeah, right here. So the seventh obstacle, as in again in this book, The Tao of Health, Longevity, and Immortality, the teachings of the immortals Chung and Le by Eva Wong. The seventh obstacle says, when you listen to debates among teachers and fellow students, you are bound to be led astray by their suggestions. You search blindly through a tangle of leaves and branches and then discover that there is nothing worthwhile. These so-called teachers and their students are interested only in arguing about the relative merits of lesser techniques. They do not know that the sun and the moon do not rise easily, and that when they rise, the light is so brilliant that it can be seen by all. They do not know that the thunder does not roar trivially, but when it does, the sound is so deafening that it can be heard by all. They try to dazzle each other with words, not realizing that their elegant speeches are like the fleeting lights of exploding fireworks. Bickering over semantics, they argue endlessly and can never agree on anything, being blinded by discussions and arguments. This is the seventh article.
Mm. So, Ina, do you want to start or should
You
I
go
share
ahead.
our own thoughts on these things so we
Go
get
ahead.
to share? Okay. Um, so I find this one really interesting because I think this kind of thing does happen a decent amount where you can get people who they want to argue, they want to debate, especially they get obsessed with some particular way of looking at things, and their main thing is just to keep debating it and debating it and debating it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't translate into any real movement or any real practice. So I have found that to be true. So the fact that that gets listed as its own separate obstacle, I find that really fascinating. And I've had
Yes.
this almost my entire life as that I've been interested in these kinds of things. There's always been people who would come up, you know, I remember doing one retreat where I had the weird karma of a bunch of people doing that. They all
Mm.
came up with their theories and they started talking at me. And I was like, I'm trying to do a fucking retreat. And I want to hear your theories. People I barely knew. I was like, this is odd. But it is kind of like that. And I would sometimes find that it would be people who would either get obsessed with some particular teaching, they're really interested in Taoist stuff from this certain person, and then later on they would realize, oh, that's not the thing, and they would move on to something else, and then they try to like to argue and debate you about the next thing to persuade you of the next thing that you're supposed to do, and you'd be like, okay, you before this other one was the genius, thing that was supposed to be the solution to all of our lives problems, and now you switched over to this other one, and it would kind of repeat this way. Sometimes it would be, and sometimes those were people who were good in the sense that they were actually doing stuff. Other times it would be people who would become really enthralled with some book or some particular thing, and they'd go blah blah blahing about that. And you look at them, you'd be like, well, you're not practicing anything, you know? And but you're trying to like convert me to something that you don't even do. So I look at this being kind of an odd human tendency, and I think it's very real. And I'm impressed with the fact that they did that as a thing, in this book to make that
Sure.
its own unique thing, because it's a definite odd obstacle to see it, and like when they run their way through all of these nine, they go in these different directions. And by the time you get to these last few, you're like, oh, that's an interesting one to choose. But I could definitely feel like I can say from firsthand experience that I've seen this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
People spend more energy trying to convert other people than they spend working on themselves.
Yes.
It's interesting. I know. So what's your experience with that? Have you had that happen in your life? Is that just my unfortunate karma? I don't know.
No, I do believe that when you are this kind of thing creeps up, I believe in every philosophic, spiritual kind of in everything, even in industry, or as some idiot would say, industry. Um,
Which idiot? I wonder if
I
he's
don't
referring.
know. Yeah. Um, but there is this idea, at least from my experience, of instead of standing on your own merits of whatever it is that you are into, there is a tendency, and maybe this is just a normal human tendency, but to put down another or contrast yourself to something else, a related field, right? And by proving your worth by comparing yourself to what you believe to be an inferior field, and then by, proving this via argument, I guess you believe yourself to be worth more, and therefore making yourself have increasing your own value to your participants in this some kind of way. And this again runs across almost all gamuts, right? Even in we'll go comic books, right? Oh, Marvel is so much better than DC, whatever. Oh, the White Sox are better than there's always in order to like why you can't just have something that is good standing on its own 2 feet. It has to be good, but only in comparison to something that is less good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you said it in an interesting way. I mean, you're saying it now in an interesting way too. But when we were talking off Mike, you were saying there's probably just a natural polarizing tendency inside of people, right?
Yeah. I mean, if we go, if
Want
so,
to do that, and then they want to compare themselves to something else, and then argue and debate it out, right?
yeah, so we can go a little bit. I was trying to be a little bit more, I guess, localized, with the reference, but like, yeah, in a meta sense, we just go there. In a meta sense,
Oh, I'm
this.
sorry, did I jump your thing too
No,
fast?
no, no, you're good. I mean, that's where the
Yeah.
conversation goes. Fuck practicality. Um, in a meta sense, in when I look at this passage, right, and I'm reading it, I took some notes as stuff was going, but like one of the things that I wrote down was that this is a binary view of life, right?
Mm.
So that in order for this to exist, this must not exist. In order for this to be good, this then inherently now has to be bad. And this is sort of like the uh, idealization of polarity. And as regardless of whatever we call ourselves, right? People ask me, "Oh, what do you practice?" I say, "Well, I'm not Buddhist, but I'm definitely not Buddhist either." You know what I'm saying? But more realistically, I think what my teacher Andre would say is that we're yogis, yogins, people who are trying to establish and maintain an authentic state of mind. We've mentioned this before. The word for this in Tibetan is naljor. And so, people who are trying to develop the clear light mind and keep it there, right? But this is transcendent of this or that. It's transcendent of masculine or feminine. It's transcendent of good or bad, right? Things like this is transcending. It's not removing them from the equation. It's just not being caught in the spin cycle. I think I forgot what we were talking about at one point, Eric, but I said that people have emotions and they become like ping pong balls inside of their minds and hearts, only to be batted forth, at the whims of whatever.
Yeah, back and forth, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is the beginning stages of this in my mind. As what are they, Eric, what's the line? How does it say it from the whatever the Taoist line, from the void, from the Tao comes the two, and then from the
Comes
two
the
comes
one, the one becomes the two, and eventually the two will evolve to the 10,000 things or something, however you want to phrase it, right?
right. And so
Yeah,
this is sort of like uh, a very succinct version of the creation story, right? That the out from the like a primordial soup came one, and then the one divided into two, and then the two became everything. But that two is polarity. That's the yin yang. That's the light dark. That's the positive negative, you know, and which is required for things to manifest in reality. But fundamentally, and I believe in the human mind, they have a deep tendency towards this. And even in the Tibetan, like in the Tibetan lore, they talk about people debating each other, you know?
Well, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like this has been there for a very, very long time. But I believe this is part of the problem. You know, like if something is going to have merit on itself as a thing worth studying, right? And again, in addition to being a non-Buddhist Buddhist, in addition to being a yogin or a practitioner or whatever it is,
Shaman,
yeah,
right?
all the
Yeah.
things, you know, we're at deep core, we're scientists. You and I are both scientists, and I have a hard time believing that people who are not interested in developing themselves in whatever way are not also scientists in their own right. So you take something that someone says and you try it and try it and try it until you see if it works or not. You know what I'm saying? And this kind of thought, that this sort of dualistic split removes that. And so that
Hmm.
you don't have to try things. You can go, oh no, this is good, therefore that's bad. Right. And then this endless loop keeps you from chasing what is real for you. It keeps you from reality. Dualistic thinking keeps you from reality. And so in the, looping it back to this thing, and then I'll let you speak. It's like this moving back and forth, this endless debate, right? Dazzling each other with words, not realizing that their elegant speeches are like the fleeting lights of exploding fireworks, bickering over semantics. They argue endlessly and can never agree on anything because they don't want to. There's no benefit in this, actually. It doesn't benefit the people to not have a supposed external enemy. In Islam, they talk about jihad, right? Which is what the media, and rightfully so, some of the extremists use as jihad as it's a war, right? That's what they
Yeah.
call this. It's a war. But I could say not anybody, but most people who do deeper work and understand that there is language for the people who follow, right? We're speaking to those who are just listening with their ears and not with their hearts, which is the majority of people who follow religion. All religion. If this offends you, go fuck yourself. I don't really care, you know? But for those who are listening with their hearts, you understand that there is an internal aspect to what someone is saying. So yes, there is the war. Who is the war with? Yourself. That's who is the war with. The war is with you. The war is for you to control, or deal with your own desires and hatred and all these kind of things, the pushing and pulling and ignorance, that the Tibetan Buddhists have so, eloquently laid out. But that the endless debate is also your own endless fucking chatter, wondering.
Of your own potential mind, just chattering.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes. So this chapter is an external manifestation of our own internal, susceptibility to being battered back and forth by our whims based on, I think, a very fundamental um aspect of being creatures of duality in hopes that maybe one day we can transcend it.
Yeah, there's like so much stuff in there.
Yeah.
I laugh because, when you were talking about the fuck you and all that, just because you feel impassioned about it, which is awesome. Hasty Daniel.
We don't.
Um,
We love our audience. We don't mean to curse them. Sorry, guys. I'm just saying in general, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's good. It's feisty. Which is good, right? All right. So, okay. So the thing that I didn't expect in this, I thought I had my own thoughts about this one too.
Hmm.
And it's great because we take, each of us take these things in different directions, and so we learn. And I wasn't thinking about it in that dualism way, but I think it's a very insightful point. And there is maybe some tendency in people to do this. We live in this very polarized place called the United States, right? But maybe if you go deeper down metaphysically or something, it's a tendency of people to want to polarize, And this is as opposed to going yin and yang as complementary opposites. If you go yin and yang as good and bad,
Mm-hmm.
yang is us and them, to quote the old Pink Floyd song. When if you do it that way, then you've taken like this polarity thing and you've made it in this oppositional thing, not
Mm-hmm.
the complementary opposites, you know, um, that can unite, but the polar opposites that are kind of then truncated and forced to like be in perpetual opposition to one another. That could be just a metaphysical flaw that people can stumble into, which I wasn't thinking of it in that way, but I like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess for the way it would hit me would be something like if you get into that, then it does get harder to be the scientist person, the spiritual scientist, right? Which could be like you could be a spiritual scientist and still be interested in Einstein and quantum mechanics. Like those things aren't exclusive. Even that polarity is bullshit too, and we're all stuck in it, right? The scientific versus the religious or the spiritual. That's a polarity right there that people are stuck in, endlessly debating the
Mm-hmm.
way that will go, right? And it's a false debate, right? If you want to
Absolutely.
understand the reality in the life around you, well, then all of this stuff have things that could potentially have value to be said, right? You can learn great spiritual truths from looking at like Einstein, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like Rinpoche, one of our teachers, the Dalai Lama, Lama Glenn, different, you know, people acknowledge this. You can learn from the sciences. It's not like a polarizing thing.
No.
So, I think that's interesting. So then you do lose the scientific thing, which is what we were talking a little bit off mic, to go through the spiritual experiences and just see how they work, right? See what they do. When I was studying Zen, it was um, uh, Tanoi Roshi. I never personally met. He was down in Hawaii. Hosokawa Roshi worked with him, who I studied with. But he kind of got into all of this. He was like a music teacher, but he became like this very high martial artist. And then he started going into the Zen things. And it was just like, well, let's try it out and see what it does,
Yeah.
which is the scientific attitude. We got to see what things do. But the other part about that is to see what something does, you can't just sit there and talk about it. You actually got to get to the point of the doing, right? The talking isn't going to like take the place of the doing. That's just the talking about the doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. And I guess if your orientation is like that, then it does potentially become more important that I just feel good about myself by arguing myself into the position that my shit's better than other people's shit.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's obviously a strong human thing to do. Right. We can all potentially fall into those kinds of things, but that's no bueno. Right. You can't just
Mm.
have that. And it happens really like all over the place. You know, it even happens in our little world of Chinese medicine, right? Where people will say, this is my favorite one. This is my favorite version of Chinese medicine, and it's better than all others. And you're like, well, how could that possibly be?
Right.
They got thousands of years of this stuff. Why would yours be the only one that has any value? It doesn't make any sense. And I remember talking with someone about that, and they were saying, well, why aren't you more into like my thing, that I'm backing? And I was like, I don't need like Chinese medicine to be a religion for me, where I just
Right.
back the one thing. I don't think that's real and true. And then you do lose the scientific part, right? The empirical part of going into the world with a more objective mind and like working through things and see what they do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The only last one I wanted to like kind of see what you thought about Daniel too, because you brought it up.
Yeah.
Okay, two other things in this quote that I find really interesting. One is that I think there's the Tibetan Buddhist thing of the debate, you know,
Sure.
but the debate in that sense, when you look at like the tradition of the Dalai Lamas or something, isn't like they have the ones, and I don't like those stories as much either, where one person debates the other and they end up being the winner. And then, like those stories aren't as
The
interesting to
loser
me, but
has
they
to
are there.
follow the other one for 10 years. And that's what happens. A lot of them.
But there's a really famous one about like a Chinese Ho Shang or something debating one of these like Tibetan ones, maybe it's Kamoshila or something, and they debate and debate, and they're like seeing who's the winner of it, and then the Indian guy wins over the Chinese guy, and it's a big thing. Like, okay, I don't want to. Those stories don't
Depending
appeal to me that
depending on who
much.
you're listening to, either the Indian guys win on a regular basis or the Chinese guy win on a regular basis. It's
Shockingly enough,
yeah.
the judges couldn't come up with a definitive decision on that one.
Nope.
But there are those stories like that. But I think the only thing I wanted to get out was this idea of there's nothing wrong with like intellectual thought and thinking, though. That can be good for you. I mean, this whole podcast is that,
Yeah.
right? So, you can go through and, it's, you can be blinded by these things, but it isn't, I don't think it's true in Taoism or Buddhism or, any other tradition that you can't talk and debate and discuss and learn, because that's how you learn.
Yes.
So I just want to bring up the idea of analytic meditation,
Okay.
right? We don't always think of meditation as being an analytic thing, but they use that phrase in Tibet. And when I heard that one, I was like, ooh, that's interesting. I probably want to do that, or I probably have been doing that for parts of my life, and that's how you learn, right? You engage in the analytic part of things. And Robert Thurman, Bobby T, one of our favorite folks, right? Uma's dad, you know,
Hmm.
um, makes this point about, meditation isn't just shutting off your mind, right? It's okay to have thoughts and to think and debate and to question and to throw those off of other people, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Get feedback from others and to learn. It's just if it goes endless and doesn't go anywhere, when that's the point of criticism, right?
Right. That's correct.
Yeah. I mean, and I know that there's the confusion in the culture about that, you know,
Yeah.
that education involves learning. It's not just sitting and like emptying your mind so you feel better. You feel 10% happier for that 15 minutes
Mm-hmm.
that you're doing it.
Yeah, it's not a drug.
Yeah. And it's not like a mind wiper. Okay. You know, again, Robert Thurman and Bobby T does a good job with that. You're not just supposed to like knock all the stuff out of your mind for like however long you're sitting there while the incense stick burns and then like go back to the same shit that was there before. You're supposed to change somehow,
Yeah.
right? Part of that change is a lot of times rethinking how you think about things. And I mean, I wanted to empathize because I have gone through these questions around this too. I remember the very first time I met Lama Glenn Mullen, one of our favorite teachers. And a lot of people, we've done episodes with them with Robert Thurman, just to put that out there, and Lama Glenn. So if you haven't heard them, they're really cool. But I remember the first time I talked with him, I got it was my second empowerment, I guess, in the Tibetan Buddhist world. And we did our first one-on-one meeting, and I had a lot of respect for him already. I really appreciated what he was doing. And I was trying to look for like, where should I study next? And one of the things I said was, I'm not studying any fucking philosophy. And he kind of went, okay. And he didn't express a strong opinion one way or the other, but I said like no fucking philosophy, because I had like read these really complicated Buddhist books and I was like, fuck that shit.
Right.
I don't have to read that stuff anymore. Those sutras. And he kind of went, and then he recommended Gelek Rinpoche to me, which I think we talked about like at different times on the
Yeah, yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
But the first Gelek Rinpoche thing, like the philosophical text for Rinpoche was like the size of a chemistry textbook. And I was like, oh my God, I have to read all this shit. But it was so rewarding in the end, and that's the positive side of the analytic.
What was the one that text that you began with?
Well, I mean, I won't talk about the empowerment I did, but it was the manual for the empowerment, but it had all of his thoughts about all of
Oh, okay.
Buddhist. It was a thick book. You're not supposed to talk about the empowerment, so I won't, but the specific one. But I was going out there and I was in a weird situation that I felt the gratitude to him, which made me feel like I had to go through and try to meet the
Sure.
standard that he was putting up there, which I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad I had. And I'm glad I hadn't been out there yet, because a lot of it was like old hippies who weren't going to read those books anyways.
Mm-hmm.
But I was, at least it was, which we talked about before, but it still amuses me. But I tried really hard and I learned a lot through that, you know? So anyways, I wanted to give the shout out to that there is the analytic part. Not all of this is a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like once I had the Tibetan thing, I realized I had been doing that kind of analytic stuff in Zen, in Taoism, Kabbalistic things. And I learned, I get to say I learned a ton. So I know, I thought it was important. Do you agree with that part, Daniel?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I don't. It's slightly to me, it's tangential in a sense, but it brings up a good point in that like analyzation. It sounds almost sexual.
Well, you say that many times fast.
Yeah, exactly. No, but analyzing things and part of that, breaking them down and having conversation around them is a method of learning, right? Is a method of analysis. And you're saying and rightfully so, what you're saying is like that inherently is not wrong. That's not a bad
I thought that
thing.
was important because you could say, okay, I shouldn't analyze it all, or this is all
Yeah,
just debate, or all, because people sometimes want to go to that extreme of things too.
right. No, and what what I said before and what we've said a couple times now is that like the science of the study, right, which is what this is. We're looking at methods of studying. We're looking at methods of breaking down of material and absorbing it, which is, to me what studying is. Um, but then applying it. So it's not just for the simple act of digestion and assimilation, but it's for the desire to implement. And so where the break in this, and what this, I believe one of the things that this is saying is that being so wrapped up in the breakdown and assimilation keeps you in a merely theoretical realm, never to be applied. And so your experience of shifting your life doesn't occur because you're so wrapped up in the chitter chatter about what you believe it to be or not be or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that. I
Yeah,
think that's what you're saying. And then if I can, which is just coming to me now because there's a piece of this that sort of stems from what we're saying. So what they're saying essentially in my mind is be cautious of continual theoretical positioning with whatever it is that you're believing, right? This is actually very philosophical and whatever, but it's fine. Um, it says they do not know that the sun and the moon do not rise easily, and that when they rise, the light is so brilliant that it can be seen by all. They do not know that the thunder does not roar trivially, but when it does, the sound is so deafening that it can be heard by all. And so there's two pieces of that that kind of arise from what you're saying and where I'm moving it, right? So not to merely be theoretical, but to move into practicality. But that when you move into practicality, based on this, based on the that they do not know that the sun and moon do not rise easily, is that we are operating from places, even with knowledge, quote unquote knowledge, we're still operating from positions of ignorance because we don't understand the mechanics of everything. And that
mhm.
true understanding, at least in the conversation and where I'm at right now with my understanding, is that the things that are verifiable are seen by all. You don't have to break down light to know that light exists. You see light. You know what I'm saying? But the workings beyond what you see move beyond just the simple appearance of it. So it's not just that it appears to you, but that there's mechanisms behind it that you could understand. And so then you can move from practicality back into the theoretical to try and decipher what those things are. So this is what does that make sense? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Those passages are really funny to me. I mean, those are really interesting. I okay, so I want to respond to what you're saying. I just want to talk about those passages because they jump out, right? They're very
They,
poetical,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so they pop out. And so I feel a couple things about it. One is that I've spent some time with that book as you have, right?
Hmm.
But I did these kind of a chemical Taoist things where I spent a lot of time going over that. And you could even critique that book as being a critique of itself. Now, this is a little inside baseball thing, right? We don't care about this whole book, but it does happen. Like the book on the one hand is blasting people for debating about like my technique is the best and your technique is not good, and you fight back and forth and so on. And the book has, I'm going to say, a hard on for its own techniques. Like,
Fair.
and a lot of those books are like that. So they're saying, well, let's not debate techniques, but a lot of the book is our techniques are good and your techniques are bad. So it almost has like a weird kind of strangely circular quality. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say there?
Sure.
So it goes like, let me call out this problem, but when you point it to other people, what is it? The other fingers are pointing back at you or
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
yeah, totally.
It has that problem in it. So some parts of that read like it's references to other stuff that the book is talking about in
Yeah,
there.
yeah, for sure.
But on the other hand, if you read it really poetically, there's something kind of deep about that. If
Hmm.
you talk about the sun and the moon do not rising easily, like that's like almost in a way like get off your ass too.
Sure.
You know, don't just sit there because it doesn't rise easily.
Right, right.
It's not going to rise forever. So get hopping, which is
Mhm.
a major spiritual point in like we go all the way back to the stages of the path thing that we were talking about in Tibetan Buddhism. And these are labels for things, they don't really matter. But one of the big ideas is there is gets exactly to this point, like get off your ass and do stuff because it's not going to last forever, right? And then it does become kind of like an experiential thing. You have to move and you have to see the sun and the moon. You have to
Right.
translate that theoretical thing into a thing where you're actually going to have the experiences, right?
Mm,
And then you'll hear the thunder cracking, right, in a way that you'll know, right, from your own experience of this. The weird thing about that too, for me, Daniel, is something like not everybody's going to see it. That is part of the spiritual tradition thing too. If you don't work your vision to see the things, they're not self-evident. You're not going to see them. So they talk about these things that are like gross level truths, subtle level points, and very subtle level points, right? Sometimes they talk in that kind of language, right?
hmm.
It struck me all the way back in the time when I started doing Zen. It was like, yeah, it's really true. Unless you put yourself through these experiences and unless you learn the things and then, do the things and have the experiences, you're not going to see things that way,
Right.
right? You're not going to see the stuff. So it has a weird, I mean, it struck me from what you were saying. It's not self-evident. It's stuff that you have to go through some process of cultivation to be able to see, you know, which is more than just the talking about it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
What do you think about that kind of stuff? Do you have anything you
Yeah,
want to?
no, I mean, what strikes me more than, so I hear what you're saying, and that, I mean, essentially what I'm saying was the same, very similar thing,
Yeah.
moving from theory to practicality, which is, and what you're saying is like you got to do it, and that's what we're both saying that part, but I think, but maybe even the larger part, as you were talking, and I was listening to what you're saying, I was like, oh, this is poetic, and poetry is going to be interpreted by the reader, by the person doing the interpreting, right? And as they're doing that, they're going to be debating within themselves what it means, and then this, but then eventually not being frozen in debate and putting it into, call. I could also say that like the sun and the moon are representative of like yin and yang.
Yeah. Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? And so that
The
they
yin
do
and
not,
yang within your own life
yeah,
because
yep,
they don't rise easily, right?
no, no. And day moving into night is the passing of time.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so what do we understand about the construct of time other than it only moves in one direction? Which again would push you forth towards, one of our most favorite remembrances, which is the preciousness of human life and the certainty of death. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
what I was
So,
kind of talking about, right?
right,
That's
that's
the
what they're
the
that's what
whole
they're talking
spiritual
about.
path, right? Hmm.
Right,
Yeah.
which is what, which it's seeming more now like what they're saying is don't waste your fucking time. Like do what you need to do to understand things, which is what we're saying, but then don't spin the wheels forever because you can very easily be led astray. And we talked about this in the previous episode on this particular topic. When they talked about being fooled and controlled by false teachers. So it to
Mhm.
me they're very closely related in that like yes, being fooled and controlled by false teachers or people who will lead you astray is on one level, but that's if you allow yourself to be followed. If you don't allow yourself to be followed, but you want to just go tit for tat for people who you believe to be, on your own level of conversation, then you can, endlessly spend your time trying to convince somebody of something, or maybe more importantly, trying to convince yourself of something.
Or like spend time on like people you think are on your own team and the other people who are on the other team and you debate and you
Also,
debate and you
yeah,
debate.
all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I'm fascinated by like what it is that how people move from, okay, now I have an idea and I'm going to like push this through. That seems to be the hard point, right?
Yeah.
If I look at like a lot of these things, it comes down to the idea of like, how do I actually start implementing the things that I've decided are true?
Yeah.
I've gone through, okay, I'm not going to just sit here and make this just empty talk anymore. I'm going to actually start
Hmm.
pushing this and making this something kind of real. And it is very, very difficult, right?
Hmm.
But I'm really attracted to this, again, Zen, Taoist, tantric idea of like, go ahead, push it into your life, right? You have to
Yes.
push it into your life. So it doesn't just kind of sit there, you know, uh, as talk or just, you write it in your journal, but it doesn't become the thing that you do. And how does that happen? And I had this weird memory of this. I was like, okay, you can have those moments, like we try to make it personal, right? So I can remember, back in my 20s when I was really pushing to do this, right? And I could realize there was this incredible inertia, right, that could hold you back and you wouldn't push things through, right? But I was actually doing it. I was doing all these retreats, and I thought it was like I had this amazing moment. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning in the Zen retreat. I'm sitting there. I'm in the meditation room. The sun's coming up. It's like slanting through the windows. I can see it like going across the nice, shiny, clean hardwood floors because Zen people keep things pretty clean. And there was the Zen master Hosokawa Roshi, and he was sitting maybe like this Zen master, like an actual freaking Zen master, like the real deal, sitting like 2 or 3 seats over. And I was just like, it wasn't like a big enlightenment moment, except in the sense where I was like, I'm actually doing this.
Mm,
Like for real. I got out of that, like, okay, I'm just gonna talk and blah, 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 but then I just won't change things. I won't push it through and actually change. I was like, oh, I'm actually doing this. And it was like one of the happier moments of my life. You
mm.
know what I mean? Like it's one of the moments that like jump out because I was like, okay, I did something. Even if I don't
Sure.
understand shit,
Right, right.
even if my Zen is crap, I did this. I
Mm,
started this going, and I was like, okay. I got out of the thing where I was maybe just going to be the person who was just be like, and it happens to us. You can get stuck in that sort of circular internal talk or in circular debates with other people if you don't make that leap to push things through. And even that leap is so meaningful. You know what I'm saying, Daniel? I'm
hmm.
sure you've had those moments too. You find
Yeah.
yourself down in, Central America or South America, and you're actually doing the ceremony. You're like, fuck it, I'm here.
Yeah, I
I
mean, it
actually
happened, it happens here. I did a breath work cacao ceremony this past weekend. And I'm still learning, even as I've been doing them since probably like 2017. It started with just me doing it with some friends in my living room. I think I remember the first time there was 4 people there. And we just did some breathing and whatever. And now, I on a pretty much monthly basis, I get 20 to 25 people, many,
Mhm.
many, many of whom are repeat customers for years, not just like once or twice, like they've been coming for years. And I'm still learning. Like I'm still learning how to make the experience deeper and more rich. And I told them, the people this time, I said, this is a, I'm helping to create and hold space for everybody here to have an experience, but I'm also performing. This is also a performance. And when you go to a concert, usually the musician will say, the more you guys give back to us, the more we can give to you. We sort of feed each other in this way. And so I told the people that. I said, hey, this is it's a performance. And when you guys give, when you put your energy out there and you give, I feel it, and I feed off of it. You know? And so even in this way, like in the most subtle way possible, one thing out of this entire 3-hour event, I learned one thing but last time I did it, and I was able to implement it this time, and there was a change. Right,
Mhm,
right,
mhm.
like verifiably so. And then when we were done, people said, I appreciated you saying that by us giving to you, you can give more back to us. They remember, like it stuck with them. And so moving into like reality is, I don't know, like it's hard to imagine something that would have more value. You know what I'm saying? Like we've had this discussion before on like a better term for spirituality, and where is there not spirituality? I saw an ad for it said yoga for men, no spirituality. I was like, not possible.
About that some
Right, we
a while
talked about
ago.
it before. So
Yeah.
where you can't remove spirit from life, and I don't mean like woo-woo spirit, like, oh, this pencil is alive or whatever, but like you can't move the creation from its you can't move the creator from its creation. It's not possible to do so because we don't know all of the things that go into making the sun and the moon rise. Like
Mhm.
there's just so much that we don't understand. I didn't make my clothes. You didn't make your clothes. I don't know how the internet works completely. I understand satellites and fiber optic cables, but like, do I really understand how Wi-Fi works really seriously? No, but I have faith that it does. Just like I have faith in all the other things that they work, and here they are. But how can I figure out my way in the world if I'm not trying things? And so we don't get caught up in all of the this endless discussion. This endless discussion. It's just Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of agree. So the one thing I had at the end before we maybe bounce in the episode is I started
Sure.
thinking, so what's the psychology of this? You know, because we like to
Sure.
do a little psychological stuff.
Yeah.
So to me, I started thinking, okay, so who are people who say important things about this kind of stuff? And I thought about our old friend Carl Jung, who always shows up everywhere ubiquitously.
Yeah.
But he has this interesting point about like his feeling in himself that he was like two separate people, you know?
Mm,
And one person was the face that was out in the world, right? Which in some ways was probably a performance,
sure.
and then for private moments there was the parts of him that he called like personality 1 and 2, but the personality that was the more private personality was the one that would like was probably the more quote unquote spiritual one or whatever, right? And he would feel like those truths of that personality, but then he wouldn't be able to implement them into the other personality.
Mm,
He wouldn't be able to go through and like take the thing of like, okay, these are my actual truths in my private moments. Here I am. This is what's actually true for me. But then you go to meet the world and you don't push those truths out. This is past the point of debating, right? This is when you say, okay, I found these things. Now I'm not just going to empty debate them anymore. I'm going to implement them, you know? But it's hard to do that. And you could see he was struggling with that, because he had
mm,
like kind of like I don't want to say it was totally false, but he had like a social self, he had a persona.
sure.
But those moments in your private moments, and I bring this up because it's a very common meditative thing, I think. You meditate, and in your private moments, you're like, yes, got it, good. Okay, now I'm going to implement these things. Now I'm going to do these things. Got it. And then, we all have had this experience. Then you go into trying to bring those things out into the world and it just degenerates. And you can even find yourself arguing with yourself or something, like what you were talking about earlier, Daniel. Now you're debating yourself. The one personality is debating the other personality. You don't push the truths through. You know what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say?
No, totally. And whether this is I'm aware of this or not, I have for a very long time, have made a conscious effort of trying my best to be the same person all the way through.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, of course, different situations call for different facets. You know what I'm saying? I can't
Yeah.
be, um, whatever. I can't be the
Yeah.
practitioner if I'm talking to a family member. That's not my role in this particular part.
Well, that wouldn't be expedient means, right? You have to do things in an intelligent way.
Yeah.
You have to read the room, right? You have
Yes.
to read the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm absolutely not an entirely different person when I am in one role, or not, definitely not, I can say in some moments I'm a better version of myself when we're doing this in particular has helped. I mean, you speak a lot, but for sure this has definitely helped me learn to clarify my thoughts in a relatively elegant way, you know? I mean, we this is an explicit podcast, but we're not
Yeah.
dropping F-bombs constantly. Once in a fucking while.
You have to keep the conversation lively.
Yeah, you're damn right. You know what I mean? Slightly entertaining, marginally, just a bit.
Just to tick the meter just a tiny
Yeah,
bit.
just tickle it. Just we just
That little meter, just give it a little tingle.
just a little.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's been my experience too. And I think that's the Carl Rogers part of we go the ones that we like, because
Yeah.
as you get more in touch with this, then it starts to bleed out. It doesn't compartmentalize
Yeah.
in the same way. Then there's a more of a continuity between what I believe when I'm in those meditative states and what I believe when I'm out in my life. And they start to match. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
It's a weird experience, and hopefully people who are listening can kind of vibe with this too, and have sense of this too, because I think a lot of us go through this
And there,
or have gone through it. There's a lack of continuity. It's very funny, right?
yeah, there's kind of two quick examples that I'm thinking of. Mom, both are from clinic. One is with people who I work with, and the people who stick around long enough eventually start to, have some kind of results in their life and maybe adopt a meditative practice. And then sometimes, very regularly, we come in and that's what we talk about, actually. Like that's our clinical work, is to discuss their practice and the implementation of what they're learning on a gross level, like how to be present, how to not get reactive when someone says something to them that is totally bothering them or reminds them of something previously. How do they stay with not just the moment, but can they stay with their breath? Can they still feel their body? Can they still be appreciative of the space around them? Can they, you know what I'm saying? So moving those kind of play things. So from a workspace perspective, we'll call it, right? One is like implementing these kinds of things. Then the other one, you asked, how do you, moving it into real life? It's like, okay, when we're dealing with debate, probably not going to be as much with a coworker on deeper things, but where you're going to get it very deeply is with your family.
Mm.
And you are going to, not you, but many people, when you decide to make actual change, inevitably you're going to be met by resistance. Now, Eric and I have talked about this in the podcast before. Each of us, when we come back off of retreat, whether that retreat be a week or a month or a couple days, there's a bit of an integration period back with partner on this every time. Even if we know it's coming and they know it's coming, it still is there. It still comes up and they're like, hey, who are you? There's a weird thing. I don't know if it's energetic, but like our people who we live with are strange with us for a little bit. For whatever reason, I still don't understand, but
It
it's
doesn't matter how nice you try to be.
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't
You
matter.
could like be standing there with a box of candies and a flower and
No,
like a bottle of the best wine you could find, and
no,
it doesn't matter. It
doesn't
doesn't
matter.
matter. You're just not vibing the same way. Something has changed.
But
Yeah.
eventually, you're going to have to deal with this. People who, with their families in particular, because most people who are doing this kind of work are growing at a different rate than those who are not. That is not a knock against those and not saying everybody needs to do this kind of work. And we're not certainly not better for doing it. And who even knows if what my description of work is matches yours, Eric, or matches somebody of our listeners. I'm not saying any of that. All that I'm saying is that for those people who are invested in this kind of development, there ends up being a little bit of a drift away from those who are not. Now, it is incumbent on the people who are doing the work in order to kind of close that loop and find compassion, find patience, find whatever. But in that moving of your practice back into your life, right? There is going to be multiple debates. And this is
Yeah.
where it is imperative for the person who is coming from the place of development to really use all of their tools to try and rebuild the bridge so that you don't find yourself on an island by yourself, because that's like very spiritually materialistic, a very ego driven kind of practice, that you're over here and everybody else is over there. No, we don't exist alone. We exist together with everybody else. It has to happen this way, and that's part of the work. So there is value in understanding how to intellectually, psycho-spiritually engage with other people who don't hold the same values as you or the same views as you, so that you can clarify your own thoughts, much like this venture has been for me, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. But it has value in people understanding that we only can really go as far as we are willing to relate to other people. It doesn't mean we have to change our views, but it's just to say that, like, you can't look down on people because they hold different views or they hold opposing views. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to find the space in your heart and your mind for them, because without that, what are you working on?
Yeah. Complicated as fuck. Really complicated. What's interesting to me is we've been doing these episodes on these 9 obstacles, right? And you find that like inevitably, just as you're talking, they pop up.
Yeah.
Like your family is obstacle number 2. Your family of origin is obstacle number 2. Your relationships now in the present is obstacle number 3. Like they're sitting
Mhm.
there as things, right? So they take on this weird role of like they can be actual obstacles. They can be things that will fuck up your life.
Yeah.
So there's that piece. On the other hand, there's a way in which you can go through and try to use like the six perfections, like the good qualities of that. I'm going to be generous. I'm going to be thoughtful of the needs of others, Buddhist
Mm-hmm.
ethics. I'll be thoughtful of the needs of others and myself, right? I'll consider those things in a
Mm-hmm.
fair way. I'll go through and I'll be patient. I'll put effort into things, right? Even with
Mm-hmm.
people that maybe I don't see things the same way, right? I can
Mm-hmm.
try to do that. But it's also they're sitting there as things that can fuck up your life too. So that's a weird thing to make that judgment call.
Mm-hmm.
Like what way are these things that are going to fuck up my life that I have to make a stronger decision to say, this is actually going to fuck up my life and I got to think
Right.
about this differently
Right.
versus, okay, this is something where I'm going to work in a more harmonizing way to try to like smooth out what might be the differences with these other people around me because there's value there that I have to work through from a point of compassion. They're showing compassion back at me. We're trying to understand each other. Awesome. Like it's not an easy question. It's tricky, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And there's that weird part in the tantras too, where they're like, well, you really should be around other people who think about the world the same way you do, because that's going to accelerate your development forward. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's so interesting in what's being brought up there because there's these multiple little dimensions of that, right? There's so much in that. Yeah, it's not easy.
It is
It's
not.
not easy to that question. I was just talking to somebody this past week, and I don't want to be overly revealing of any
Sure.
particular person's story, but they are really in an interesting spot where there's things that they want to do, things they want to say about who they are that their family of origin doesn't like,
Totally.
right? Obstacle number two, you know, and it's creating really serious. And we had a very serious conversation about this. It's not even someone I know that well, but it was someone that we started talking about
It's
this.
someone I met on the bus.
I just forced myself in between these two people and sat down. No, it was interesting because it was. I mean, I don't even want to go into
Yeah,
details
yeah,
because I
yeah,
don't want to out.
yeah.
But it was one of those things where it was like, okay, I kind of know the person, but it was our first maybe serious or second serious conversation about this. Like I knew what was going on, and we had like a kind of a deep conversation about like, well, now you have to think about what you want to do with this
Right.
because you've hit that thing that can fuck up your life, which can be your family of origin, can be that interpersonal relationship or whatever it is. That can be the thing. So that, then that puts the person in the position of saying, okay, which way am I handling this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's going to fuck up my life, or is this a thing that I can work through in other ways? I think that's just, a deep thing to think about. And then to this person, it was like, well, maybe I mean, I would never say that, but maybe it is something that for you to be who you are, and this is the Carl Rogers thing, conditions of worth. Sometimes you get these things dumped on you that don't match who you are, right? And
Yeah.
then you have to not do those things anymore. That isn't the right family connection for you. Okay, you had that something with them, but that might not be the right one,
That's
or that
fair.
might not be the right romantic partner. And then, that isn't the right person for you, or partners for our poly friends,
That's right.
whatever it's going to be, that might. So it's interesting, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There you have it.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
got one other thing on this, but I thought maybe we can do it as a brief episode. It was the thing of like the psychology, one other aspect of psychology, but it would take a while if we talk about it. So maybe
Yeah.
we'll do a
We'll
mini
hold it.
next time.
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
seems like a stop, right?
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
want to do a little bit about like why do people not do these things sometimes? Why do people get stuck in these intellectual kind of circles? And
Sure.
sometimes it's because of like the psychology. So I want to look at Anna Freud's defense mechanisms a little bit
Yeah, that'd be great.
and how people get kind of entwined with them. And then that can lead you just around endless
Yeah,
circular stuff and others. So maybe we'll save it for a little mini episode or something.
that sounds
But it's
good.
great, like a lot of deep stuff. Thanks, Daniel, for sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, of
Learn
course.
every single time. It's really interesting,
Yeah,
to
no,
hear the.
it's a good venture. Eric, as always, thank you, and thank you to those who are listening to us, who are taking what we're saying and pondering it and having it penetrate your life in whatever way that might be. If you feel like passing the love along, please share our work with people, and if you want to, shoot us a message. We do appreciate it. Hit us up on Instagram, the Gin and Tantra Podcast, or ginandtantra@gmail.com, or leave a comment or a like in the YouTube comment section, whatever. It's all good. We appreciate all the love, you know. Yeah, we really wish everybody good practice. That's what it's about. So Eric, gracias a mucho, señor. For Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch everybody on the next one. Peace.